How many of these expressions are familiar to you? Do you know where they came from? The blind leading the blind. Our daily bread. For everything, a time and a season. The apple of my eye. There is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. God helps those who help themselves. Turn the other cheek. A good Samaritan. Am I my brother's keeper? Go the extra mile. Separate the sheep from the goats. Maybe you were aware of these sayings, perhaps all of them, but do you know from what faraway place long ago they all come? All of them have one source, the Bible. Well, all of them except one. God helps those who help themselves. That comes from Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. These sayings could be multiplied many times over to show how deeply the Bible has influenced our language, our thinking, and our culture. No other book has had such a singular influence on the development of our civilization in the Western world. In the United States alone, there are over 17 Bethels, 18 Edens, and 30 Salems, all named after Bible locations. And there are a host of others such as these in eastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Nazareth, Ephrata, and Bethlehem. But what is this book that we call the Bible? This series of programs will introduce you to the most influential book ever written. Now, let me reassure you, right at the very beginning, you don't need to know a lot about the Bible to enjoy these programs. In fact, you don't need to know anything at all about the Bible, because this series is intended to provide you with a simple and a basic introduction to this most fascinating book. And for those of you who are familiar with the Bible, there may be some surprises. In this program, we will give you a general overview. Next, how we got the Hebrew Scriptures. And then a program on the Christian Scriptures. And finally, how these writings have come down to us over many centuries and the influence that they've had throughout the world. The Bible is the most circulated and most translated book in the history of the world. It goes back as far as the innovation of the Gutenberg press, when the Bible in Latin was the first large book to be printed by movable type in the 1450s. Ever since, year after year, more copies of the Bible are printed than any other book. For the most recent year, over 60 million complete Bibles, over 90 million New Testaments, and over 1.5 billion scripture sections were published in over 2,000 languages, and the press run quantities keep growing every year. But even though the Bible may exceed all the rest in circulation, it also leads all the rest in the controversy it generates. In fact, the Bible has always provoked heated debate, drawing passionate reactions from some of the great thinkers and leaders across the ages. If we would destroy the Christian religion, we must first of all destroy man's belief in the Bible. A thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. The inspiration of the Bible depends upon the ignorance of the gentleman who reads it. It is impossible to mentally or socially enslave a Bible-reading people.
One does well to put on gloves when reading the New Testament. The proximity of so much impurity almost compels to this. I have searched in it vainly for even a single congenial trait. Everything in it is cowardice and self-deception.
All the good from the Savior of the world is communicated through this book. All things desirable to men are contained within it.
Whenever we read the obscene stories, the voluptuous debaucheries, the cruel and tortuous executions, the unrelenting vindictiveness with which more than half the Bible is filled, it would be more consistent that we call it the work of a demon than the work of God. It is a history of wickedness that has served to corrupt and brutalize mankind.
Within that awful volume, the Bible, lies the mystery of mysteries. And better that they'd never been born, who read to doubt or read to scorn. The Bible is the greatest benefit which the human race has ever experienced. The Bible grows more beautiful as we grow in our understanding of it. Well, you can see that when it comes to the Bible, we're dealing with something very powerful and perplexing. Stop and consider how, going back to George Washington, this is the only book ever used to swear in presidents and governors, or the book that witnesses are asked to place their hands on before giving solemn testimony in a court of law. And what's so interesting about the Bible is that it is in some ways so simple, a small child can grasp it, yet in other ways, the most brilliant minds have never been able to master it.
I heard one time the Bible compared to a pool of water, a pool that in parts is so shallow that a child can go wading in the water, but a pool also that is so deep at another place that an elephant can go swimming there. Well, the Bible is a wonderful book that involves passages which in some cases are very deep and profound. But in general, the Bible as a whole is simple enough for anyone who's untutored to read it and to understand what God's will and way would be for that person.
Bibles come in every imaginable shape, size, and format. From this children's picture Bible, or if you prefer, comic book Bibles. This is what the first edition of the King James Bible looked like. At a much smaller level, here is the whole Bible the size of a thumb. This one was actually called the Thumb Bible. It was small and convenient for pioneers to take with them as they braved the wilderness. Then there was this Finger Bible. Here is the whole Bible on this small piece of microfilm. Here is a poster with a whole Gospel. Or here, a poster with the whole New Testament, with the typeface spaced in such a way as to create the image. In Ethiopia, the Ge'ez tribe uses only handwritten copies of the scriptures on animal skins. This is the book of Psalms and their conception of King David. Here is the Bible on audio cassette. Or you can have the Bible on your computer, in English, or if you prefer, in the original languages, Hebrew and Greek. The Bible has been animated on film in several versions for children, and whole books reproduced word for word on film. The one person whose life has been interpreted on film more than any other is Jesus, from the pages of the Bible. The versions of the Bible are in the thousands. There's probably not a single communications medium or art form into which the Bible has not been put. What does the word Bible mean? The word probably comes from here. This is the port of Byblos in Lebanon. Byblos was known to be an important place for the shipment of papyrus. Byblos in the Old Greek language originally meant the inner bark of the papyrus plant. Papyrus was used for paper in the ancient world. You can see how we get the word paper from papyrus. Papyrus then was used to make books. So biblos, from the papyrus plant, referred to books. It's as simple as that. Bible simply refers to book. And what we think of as the Bible wasn't even called the Bible until about the 4th century AD. The Bible is thought of as a holy book. In fact, publishers find that when they put the word holy on the cover so that it says Holy Bible rather than just Bible, they sell more. But what does this mean? Many religions have books that they consider holy, and the origin of holy books is explained in very different ways. For example, followers of Islam believe that their holy book, known as the Quran, was revealed directly from God to the Prophet Muhammad over a period of about 20 years, beginning around the year 610. The revelations came through various means, including dreams, directly hearing from God, and through the angel Gabriel. Mormons claim that their holy book, called the Book of Mormon, came to their founder, Joseph Smith, when an angel named Moroni told Smith where some golden tablets were buried. Smith found them and translated them, and they formed the basis for the founding of the Mormon Church. The origin of the Bible is accounted for in a quite different way. The Bible is rooted and grounded in history. It deals with what happened at places like here on the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus stepped into a boat to teach. This boat, dating back to the very time of Jesus, was discovered just a few years ago. The Bible came from the experience of specific people, in specific places, at specific times. The Bible deals with the meaning of human life on this planet from within the stories of people who lived on this planet. Now, we are not discussing the question of whether or not the Bible was inspired by God, as most Jews and Christians believe regarding their scriptures. We're simply observing that even if they are inspired, the inspiration was worked out through a process that involved human life, human history, the stuff of life that is common to us all. The Bible is about people and events that took place in our world. The Bible, for the most part, centers on a small part of the world, this region, the Middle East, with the primary events taking place in the small land of Israel. Israel is roughly the same in size as the state of New Jersey. You can readily see why this region has always been a kind of crossroads of the world. Here, Africa, Asia, and Europe meet. This is where most of the Bible was created and where most of the biblical events happened. And we can go back today to those ancient worlds and visit many of the very places where the events recorded in the Bible actually took place. Egypt, where the Hebrews were enslaved under the Pharaohs. The Jordan River that the Israelites crossed to enter the Promised Land. That Promised Land that then, as today, is so inviting, yet in other ways so intimidating. Bethlehem, where David tended his father's sheep and where Jesus was born. The site of the upper room on Mount Zion, where the Last Supper was held. Caesarea on the Mediterranean Sea, a key early church location for the spread of the gospel to the Gentiles. Corinth, a busy Greek seaport to which 2 New Testament letters were written. And the focal point of the lands of the Bible, the city of Jerusalem, sacred today to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. This city is mentioned 656 times in the Bible. Over the centuries, Jerusalem has been destroyed 17 times and 18 times rebuilt. And this world that the Bible deals with has been around for a long time. Bear in mind that this is a book whose writing was finished some 1,900 years ago. But how long do you think that it actually took to write this book? Well, how long does it usually take to write a book? Rabbi Jacob Neusner tells us in the introduction to his book, A Rabbi Talks with Jesus, that he wrote it in 8 days. 3 Blind Mice is Ken Auletter's account of how the American TV networks haltingly groped their way into the new communications environment it took him 6 years to find out and tell us. Diane Middlebrook claims that she worked for 10 years on this one, her biography of poet Anne Sexton and her tumultuous life that ended in suicide. Saint Augustine lived in the time of the barbarian invasion of the mighty Roman Empire. He tried to make sense of what was happening to the world and worked for 12 years on his classic City of God, written in the early 5th century and still published today. So books can be written in a short time or take years. But when we come to the Bible, there's just nothing that compares with it. The Bible took well over 1,000 years to write, by dozens of different authors. That's right, over 1,000 years. And that's the minimal amount of time beyond dispute. Indeed, it probably took much longer to write. You remember we showed how the word Bible really means just book? Well, that can be somewhat misleading, because the Bible itself is more like a library of books. A library that was written and gathered together over a very long period of time. Let's look at this library. We traditionally divide the Bible into 2 major sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Testament refers to a will or covenant, so the Testaments refer to a kind of agreement between God and his people. First came the Old Testament or Hebrew Scriptures. Later, the New Testament or the Christian Scriptures. For the Hebrew Scriptures or Old Testament, Jews, Catholics and Protestants all agree on the exact same 39 books that make up this section of the Bible. Jewish scholars often counted these books as 24, but that's because some were combined and counted as one. For the New Testament, just about all Christian bodies agree to the exact same 27 books. There is an additional section in the Catholic and Orthodox Bibles called the Apocrypha, or deuterocanonical books. Some Protestant Bibles also include them as valuable for edification, but not as authoritative scripture. For this series, however, we'll not deal with these additional books, but we'll confine ourselves to those books of the Old Testament which Jews and Christians accept, and those of the New Testament acknowledged by all Christian bodies. Thus, in our Bibles, we have the very same books that were recognized as Holy Scripture by the Jewish people when they finalized the Old Testament, and the very same books that were recognized by the Christians when they confirmed the New Testament. But there are also some obvious and inevitable differences between our Bibles and the original writings. First of all, the languages in which the scriptures were originally written are different. Today, we have translations. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew and some in Aramaic, and the New Testament in Greek. The original versions and the ancient copies of the originals didn't have chapter or verse divisions as we have in our Bibles today for easy identification of passages. These are relatively new innovations. Verse divisions for the Hebrew Scriptures were probably introduced in the 10th century by Jewish scribes known as Masoretes. Bishop Stephen Langton, who later became Archbishop of Canterbury, divided the Bible into chapters while at the University of Paris in the 13th century. Robert Estienne was a French printer who introduced verse divisions into the New Testament while a refugee in Geneva in 1551. The chapter and verse divisions enable you to find specific places in the Bible quickly. It's not like a typical book where someone can just give you a page number or chapter to find. Because the Bible is 66 different books, you need to have the book title to look something up. And while there's an organization to the groupings of the titles that you can soon come to recognize, the titles themselves don't always suggest a logical order. Some titles indicate the person the book is about. There are Ruth, Job, and Jonah. Other titles indicate the theme. There is Genesis, or beginnings, and Exodus, about the Israelites leaving Egypt. Or the title can indicate the kind of literature. There are chronicles or history. There is the Book of Psalms. They are songs. Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings about how to cope in life. Or the book can be named after the author or messenger. Here are the words of the prophet Isaiah, or Joel, or Amos, or the accounts of the life of Jesus by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then there are books named after their original destination, such as believers in a particular city, as is the case with Romans or Ephesians. Other books were given the name of individuals to whom the writings were addressed. Paul wrote 2 letters to his young follower named Timothy. Another was to Philemon, a disgruntled master of a runaway slave. Once you know the book title, you find on what page that book begins, and then go to the chapter and verse. For example, if you see a reference to Our Father who is in heaven as Matthew 6:9, you simply have to find Matthew in the contents, go to that place, and then look for chapter 6 and the 9th verse. The writers of the Bible were incredibly diverse. There was Moses, a prince in ancient Egypt who became the great leader and lawgiver of Israel. Solomon, a wise and wealthy king. Ezekiel, a priest and prisoner of war. Amos, a shepherd in Israel. Matthew, a despised collector of taxes for the Roman government. Peter, a fisherman. Paul, an educated Jew who became the greatest Christian missionary ever. These and over 24 more wrote, as we've noted, over a 1,000-year period. But the earliest of the writings begins well over 3,000 years ago. But their combined work still speaks to people everywhere in every age. Yes, even our own. They wrote with ruthless and sometimes embarrassing honesty. And they push us to look at the basics. What we are to think of ourselves. How people are to treat each other. How to handle our guilt and fears. How God reaches down to people. How we can find God. How nations are to relate to each other. How humankind is to relate to nature. What is the meaning of life and the reason for the universe? The Bible is the most amazing book that the world has ever known. No other book has been as widely read or translated or touched as many lives. People over the centuries have looked to it for wisdom and for guidance. For just one example, countless people have found courage and strength in this simple meditation from the book of Psalms. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Join us for the next programs as we see how we got the Bible.